What's happening, guys? Welcome into another boxing breakdown and prediction show for this weekend's massive heavyweight clash over on the Zone in London. As you can tell, I'm excited about this one between unified heavyweight champ Anthony Joshua and one of the pound-for-pound stars of the sport right now in Oleksandr Usyk. So let's get into it. Joshua comes into this one as the pretty much consensus minus 300 favourite here, and honestly, he hasn't been this short of a favourite since, the Andy Ruiz Jr. rematch, Vladimir Klitschko fight. So that should tell you all you need to know about the real threat Usyk poses here to Joshua. Usyk is a guy who, while on the surface, Joshua's had a lot more fights than him in the professional ranks. Dig under the bonnet here. He's had an absolutely stellar amateur career, won gold in London, as did Joshua. Fought in tons of semi-professional outfits as well, like the World Series of Boxing, before eventually turning pro. So he's a guy with an absolute ton of experience, a lot more so than Joshua even, and he no doubt try and use that age and experience to his advantage here on Saturday night as he looks to try and unseat a reigning heavyweight unified champion in Joshua in his home city of London. For his part, Anthony Joshua slimmed down a lot from his career high back in 2017. That absolute 254-pound juggernaut we saw against Carlos Takam a few years ago, has now been replaced, especially since the Andy Ruiz loss, with a slimmed down fighter. He's roughly 20 pounds lighter than he was back then, as he looks to add more speed and mobility to his game as the level of opponent has increased. That new focus on movement worked well in the Andy Ruiz Jr. rematch, as Joshua was extremely effective from the outside in that fight. He limited Ruiz from closing the distance on him, and won that fight via a wide points decision. But, that won't be the case here on Saturday night against a far more highly mobile opponent in Oleksandr Usyk. The Ukrainian returned to his homeland recently to train under Vasily Lomachenko's father, Anatoly, and that means a heavy emphasis on footwork as they look to take advantage of vulnerabilities in AJ's game. Overall, there's simply no question to me that Usyk presents the biggest challenge to Joshua's career up to this point. No doubt for me, he's definitely the best boxer that Joshua's faced so far in his career, one of the best cruiserweight champions of all time. So this really comes down to a matter of size and power. And if Usyk, who, it must be said, hasn't looked particularly fantastic in his two fights at heavyweight so far, can handle the kind of firepower that Joshua brings. And if he can, he has a very real possibility of getting his hand raised in there on Saturday night. Usyk has already fought some tremendous power punches over the course of his career so far. He fought Joe Joyce a few years ago, who's on a monster run himself in the heavyweight division right now. Knocking out opponent after opponent, and as well as that former cruiserweight champion Murat Gassiev as well, who, whose nickname is Iron, effectively the Russian Mike Tyson, and that's not for his love of pigeons. That guy hits hard. So both of those guys hit with absolutely blunt force trauma. Both men have KO percentages well north of 75%, and Usyk handled both guys pretty easily. So Joshua, who for the last 4 or 5 years, he hasn't been particularly keen to impose himself on opponents from the get-go. Quite happy in there to simply box, use his jab, work his way inside. Shouldn't pose any more of a power threat to Usyk than anything he's already faced up to this point in his career. I think Joshua will look to try and box for the most part in this fight. That's who he is right now. He has improved considerably, in fairness, over his last few fights as well in that regard. And when trainer Rob McCracken, he is one of the best in the business at his disposal here to try and work out a game plan to beat Usyk. But, to try and outbox a guy as experienced and, technically brilliant as Usyk, I just don't see it. Joshua has had serious stamina problems in the past in fights as well. Gassed out against Klitschko. Ruiz also, that first fight, took multiple rounds off against Parker and Pulev as well. So perhaps that's the reason he's not willing to go for a Derek Chisora type fight here, go for the kill from the outset. But, frankly, as we said, that's not his game now anyway. Usyk is generally a slow starter in fights. Like every other top-tier technician out there, he likes to study opponents for a few rounds first, try and work out patterns in the way they set up. And in my opinion, at least, that tendency for Usyk to start slow in fights gives Joshua his best chance of winning this fight. Any slow rounds that take place in this fight will automatically go to the champion here, especially in front of 60,000 plus screaming British fans in London. So if Joshua can keep it subdued here, try and keep that fight at a distance, keep Usyk honest, with a few long-range power shots from the outside, and use that 4 or 5 inch reach dynamic to his advantage, then that's likely Joshua's best route for victory here, in my opinion. And a plus 300 for Joshua to win by decision, That looks like a very appealing price to me in terms of method of victory here. My favourite bet for this fight, however, is Usyk to win round 7 to 12 at plus 200. That is an absolutely nuts price to me. Different books are hanging out different numbers for this prop, so shop around a bit. But at that price, that's something I can definitely see happening on Saturday night as well. The danger for Joshua here, in my opinion, is that while Usyk is generally a slow starter in fights, once he does get warmed up, once he's worked you out to a great enough degree, that he's comfortable moving in on the inside against you, taking control of that pocket, he's absolutely incessant from that point of the fight on. Usyk simply won't allow Joshua time off in there. Those mid to late rounds Joshua was able to take off against Klitschko and Pulev, they won't be available to him this time around. He's going to have to work throughout here, and that kind of physical exertion, coupled with the mental pressure what Usyk brings, I can see Joshua wearing down here over the back half of this fight, in all honesty, and possibly getting stopped late here. On the surface, this is a fight between a big power puncher in Joshua and a pure boxer in Usyk, so it's no surprise to see AJ by knockout and Usyk on points trading at the two shortest prices on method of victory. But that's not how I see this fight. I think if it does go to decision, Joshua is the more likely victor here, as while Usyk can no doubt outbox him in London in front of AJ's home support. He's basically going to have to pitch a shutout from the get-go here, and to get anywhere close to a win. And I just don't see that happening. While if the KO takes place, and I'm not going to argue with anyone about how hard Joshua can hit. We've seen him all destroy opponents in the past with heavy shots. I just feel the stoppage will more likely come from the Usyk side of the street here, as he mentally and physically wears out Joshua, and also has the power and crispness himself to finish this one late. So, it's such a fascinating fight either way. I like both plays. I'm on both plays also, as I do expect one of them to cash. But for the purpose of this video, we'll go with the higher price one here and take Oleksandr Usyk to get the stoppage in round 7 to 12 at a huge plus 1,200 price for Saturday. That'll wrap things up for this week. As always, leave us your thoughts in the comment section below. And you can also catch me over on Twitter at the SportsWolf83 and at my handicapper page, Kevin Dolan, over at WagerTalk. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time, Slán a bhaile.